Welcome back to our Life Group Bible study on the book of Genesis. Tonight we're going to be in chapter 19, so open up those Bibles and go ahead and turn there now. Last chapter we ended with Abraham trying to bargain with God, trying to narrow the number down of how many righteous people could be in Sodom and Gomorrah and God not destroy it. So he whittled it all the way down to 10, thinking, well, surely Lot and his family make up 10 righteous people. So he felt pretty good about Sodom and Gomorrah not being destroyed. But in chapter 19, we're going to see that Abraham was a little bit faulty in his thinking there. It was too optimistic. So let's go ahead and read in chapter 19, starting with verse 1. That evening, the two angels came to the entrance of the city of Sodom. Lot was sitting there, and when he saw them, he stood up to meet them. Then he welcomed them and bowed with his face to the ground. "My lords," he said, "come to my home to wash your feet and be my guests for the night. You may then get up early in the morning and be on your way again." "Oh no," they replied. "We'll just spend the night out here in the city square." But Lot insisted, so at last they went home with him. Lot prepared a feast for them, complete with fresh bread made without yeast, and they ate. But before they retired for the night, all the men of Sodom, young and old, came from all over the city and surrounded the house. They shouted to Lot, "Where are the men who came to spend the night with you? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them." All right, I'm going to pause there, and this is a crazy scene. But one of the things that I find is interesting is the Lot's reaction. I would be fascinated to know exactly what these angels look like, because somehow Lot understood that these men were not just normal guys visiting the city. There was something special about them. He knew they were from the Lord. And so Lot sees them. And he sees them coming into this town square in this city of Sodom and Gomorrah, and he knows they do not belong here. And he kind of tries to quickly usher them to his house. He's like, "Please, please, come stay with me." It really feels like he is trying to get them out of public view as fast as possible because he's worried about what might happen. And so he gets them to his home as soon as possible. Unfortunately, these men were spotted, and just how depraved the society of Sodom and Gomorrah was, that all the men of the city, young and old, it says, surrounded Lot's house and is demanding that Lot send these two men out there so that they can have sex with them. Just a really sickening situation here. But the first point I want to pull from this is as point number one. A believer living in sin shouldn't be comfortable around a believer who isn't. A believer living in sin shouldn't be comfortable around a believer who isn't. The reason why I pull this point is it's clear that Lot is uncomfortable in this situation. He knows these men do not belong here, and in just their presence alone, reminds him that he does not belong in this city. And so he's extremely uncomfortable with them being here, and he tries to get them to come to his house and out of sight really quick, and also gets them to kind of get out of the city by the next morning. He wants them to pass through quickly. He doesn't want them around. And it's interesting how frequently this is the case. It is very rare for someone to be living in sin and attend church regularly. Now, there's exceptions to every rule, but usually when someone starts falling into a pattern and cycle of sin, they usually start going MIA from church. They stop showing up. Their attendance is very sporadic. Is because they don't want to be convicted of their sin. They also don't want to be around believers that are happy and faithful and loving and devoted, and they don't want to be held accountable for what they're doing. And so what usually happens is they fall off the wagon. And I saw this pattern very consistently as I was growing up with my own friends. And it'd be a consistent pattern where I wouldn't see some of my closest buddies for a month or two. They would just kind of just fall off the radar. And when I would see them again, I'd be like, "Hey, what's going on? Like, why haven't we hung out? Why haven't I heard from you? Why aren't you answering my phone calls?" And it would always be because they were doing something they shouldn't be doing. They knew they shouldn't be messing around with this kind of thing, or they shouldn't be in that kind of relationship. And I wasn't a judgmental person, and I wasn't somebody who would shun someone or ostracize someone because they were living in sin. But just by the presence of me doing the right thing and living the right way, even my closest friends didn't want to be around me. I remember very clearly, one example is my best friend at the time. We always hung out. I always saw him. He would always stop by the house, and for a couple month period, I almost never saw him. And he was always real sheepish about hanging out. And finally I was to come on over, hang out with me. And he did. And he was just acting really skittish. And, I was trying to draw him out of the conversation. Finally, he revealed that he was in a relationship he knew he shouldn't be in. And he was doing things in a relationship he knew he shouldn't be doing. And I didn't say anything. I didn't judge him. I didn't stop wanting to hang out with him or anything like that. But just by the fact that I just drew quiet and just kind of probably looked at him with a look of, have you completely lost your mind? What are you thinking? Kind of look. I didn't even have to say anything, but it was funny. During the conversation, he slowly started just convicting himself. He just started, I know I shouldn't be in it. You know what? I need to get out of it. You know what? I am going to get out of it. I'm going to get things right with God. I'm going to come to church with you next Sunday. And so, I literally didn't say anything. And so he just kind of came to the point of realization he needed to get out of the sin and he needed to start doing the right thing. And if we are living the right way and if we are shining a light, then that is the natural reaction that should happen with believers hanging around us that are living in sin. They should not be comfortable around us. If they are comfortable around us, there is something wrong with our walk with God. There's something wrong with our testimony. We don't have to be judgmental and we don't have to say mean-spirited things and we don't have to shun them. Just by the fact that we are living and shining a light, they are going to naturally want to cower from that light or they're going to want to repent and come back to the light. That's the natural way things should work. And this is what happens with Lot. These angels made Lot convicted, and he starts acting skittish around them. But let's keep reading. I'm going to read now, starting with verse 10. Actually, starting with verse 6. So Lot stepped outside to talk to them, shutting the door behind him. Please, my brothers, he begged, don't do such a wicked thing. Look, I have 2 virgin daughters. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do with them as you wish. But please, leave these men alone, for they are my guests and are under my protection. Stand back, they shouted. This fellow came to town as an outsider, and now he's acting like our judge? We'll treat you far worse than those other men. And they lunged towards Lot to break down the door. But the 2 angels reached out, pulled Lot into the house, and bolted the door. Then they blinded all the men, young and old, who were at the door of the house, so they gave up trying to get inside. Again, there's just so much here. This is such a fascinating story, but it also is very sobering. I am just absolutely sickened. Just disgusted by Lot's actions here. How can you give up your daughters to sexual abuse? How can you willingly turn over 2 virgin daughters and compromise them and send them out to a throng of sick, depraved men and just let them have their way with them? That's his offering here. How is it possible that Lot could get to this situation? And what's even more mind-blowing, everything that I seem to see in Genesis on Lot seems negative. You don't see a whole lot of positive about Lot, but yet the New Testament calls Lot a righteous man. So at one point in his life, he had to turn his life over to God and believe and trust in God and be faithful to him. And so at some point, Lot was clearly a believer. And so the question is, how does a believer get to the state where he would be willing to do this to his very own daughters? Well, this brings me to my second point. By spending enough time in the wrong places and with the wrong people, we are capable of horrible things too. By spending enough time in the wrong places with the wrong people, we are capable of horrible things too. I just know so many different examples to share with this. I know people from good families who have become drug addicts, and their addictions get so bad that their own family will not allow them into their houses. We're talking parents, grandparents, siblings will not let that person spend the night because they are so fearful of getting stuff stolen from them because it's happened over and over and over again. I know people with serious gambling addictions who, again, they have stolen money from their closest friends and from family members and have had to be ostracized from the family because they're completely untrustworthy. And I think there's a tendency that there are sins out there that we would never commit and that we would never do such a thing. And we look at Lot's situation, we would never do that, and, just hand over our daughters like that. But, Lot was at one point a righteous man. And he also lived with the most righteous man probably in all the earth, and Abraham at the time. And so he came from a good home environment, and yet he still fell this way. Why? because he surrounded himself with such depravity. He surrounded himself with these men of the city that were sick and twisted, and he was spending enough time in that culture. The culture seeped into his own perspective and his understanding and his own morality, and he changed and became this person. And if we think that we are above sins, we are walking a very dangerous path. I know I have had a problem with thinking I would never commit adultery. I've been burned by adultery, and it's been very painful. And so the sin, it disgusts me because I've just been burnt by it so bad. And it's easy for me to think, because I have been so hurt by it and have been so disgusted by it, that I would never commit adultery. But I've been very convicted the last couple of years and thinking that way. It's a very dangerous mindset to think that you can't fall to that kind of sin. I absolutely can. If I stop pursuing my wife and I stop pursuing God and I stop doing the things that I need to do and just get comfortable in my relationship and allow temptation to surround me and, flirt with the line of inappropriateness, I too can fall down that path. I too can commit adultery. I absolutely can. We're only safe as long as we're actively pursuing God and guarding our hearts. The moment that we start letting negative influence into our life and just get comfortable with those negative influences, there's no way for those negative influences not to affect us. And the worst influences are the worst things and more horrible things that we can commit ourselves. And so don't think you're above any sin. Don't think that you can't fall like Lot fell. We need to guard our hearts. All right, but let's see the result of Sodom and Gomorrah's sin and the destruction that's about to happen. So verse 12 now. Meanwhile, the angels questioned Lot. Do you have any other relatives here in the city? They asked. Get them out of this place, your sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone else, for we are about to destroy the city completely. The outcry against this place is so great it has reached the Lord, and he has sent us to destroy it. So Lot rushed out to tell his daughter's fiancés, Quick, get out of the city. The Lord is about to destroy it. But the young men thought he was only joking. At dawn the next morning, the angels became insistent. Hurry, they said to Lot, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here. Get out right now, or you will be swept away in the destruction of the city. When Lot still hesitated, the angels seized his hand and the hands of his wife and the 2 daughters and rushed them to safety outside the city, for the Lord was merciful. When they were safely out of the city, one of the angels ordered, Run for your lives and don't look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountains, or you will be swept away. Oh no, my lord, Lot begged. You have been so gracious to me and saved my life, and you have shown such great kindness, but I cannot go to the mountains. Disaster would catch up to me there, and I would soon die. See, there's a small village nearby. Let me go there instead. Don't you see how small it is? Then my life will be saved. All right, the angel said, I will grant your request. I will not destroy the little village, but hurry, escape to it, for I can do nothing until you arrive there. This explains why the village was known as Zoar, which means little place. All right, I'm going to pause there, and this is point number 3. We are often nonchalant about sin, while God is deadly serious. We are often nonchalant about sin, while God is deadly serious. Here's Lot, and he's being told by angels. He knows these men are from God. He probably knows that they are angels. And they are telling him, unequivocally, that the city is about to be destroyed, that it's going to be consumed and just utterly destroyed, and that if he does not get out, he is going to be destroyed with all of his family. This is very clearly stated. The angels are acting with a sense of urgency, and Lot waffles. He drags his feet. He has to be literally pulled out of the city. And even then, he's bargaining for not going up into the mountains to safety, but to some nearby town. It's so bizarre. It makes absolutely no sense. And it's exactly what we do all the time. God has this great sense of urgency. He tells us that people are dying and going to hell every minute of every day. And yet, we just go about our life like there's no sense of urgency, that we don't need to share the gospel, that people aren't dying and going to hell. We just go about our business acting like there's no big deal, and we just drag our feet. God tells us to flee from sexual sin. He tells us to run from sin and temptation. And yet we kind of want to dance along the border. We want to know where the border is, and then we want to go right up to it, and we kind of want to flirt with it and just kind of dance along the border. And we waffle and we equivocate and we don't run like he says to run. God is deadly serious about sin. So serious that this place had gotten so awful, he decides to wipe it out because the outcry, the abuse, the debauchery that was happening in the city was so great that he just couldn't tolerate that level of sin anymore. That's how serious he took it. But you know what? He takes sin just as seriously today. He is disgusted by it, and he wants us to run from it. And while it won't always cause physical death, sin does cause spiritual death, and he takes it very seriously. That's why when Jesus talks about, gouge out your eye or cut off your hand, yes, there's some kind of metaphorical nature to that. There's some kind of figurative language with that. But the bottom line, there's some seriousness to it too. It's that serious. You literally would be better off without a hand than you would be just going down a pathway of sin and causing so much destruction to other people and to yourself. And so he takes it seriously. We need to take it seriously. All right, but we're going to wrap up this chapter by reading this last section because I want to see what happens as a result to Lot here. So I'm taking up with verse 23. Lot reached the village just as the sun was rising over the horizon. Then the Lord rained down fire and burning sulfur from the sky on Sodom and Gomorrah. He utterly destroyed them along with the other cities and villages of the plain, wiping out all the people and every bit of the vegetation. But Lot's wife looked back as she was falling behind him, and she turned into a pillar of salt. Very strange, interesting story. They actually think they might have found the actual Sodom and Gomorrah. They found a city where it's supposed to be located in the plain, and the city was destroyed by a cataclysmic event. And it's right near the Dead Sea, where there's a lot of salt mines and a lot of salt deposits. And what would have likely happened, is if some fire did come down from heaven, let's say, it was a meteorite or whatever it was that hit the earth, in a ball of flame, and it would basically cause the sand to fly out and become liquefied and very hot. And so if Lot's wife did stay behind in the valley and kind of look back and kind of want to watch what happened, it very much likely could have happened where hot salt did just encompass her body in this explosion of whatever fire hit the earth, and that's why she kind of turned into a pillar of salt, because she was encased in hot salt. Just a possibility, but it's fascinating. But Lot's wife, because she turned back to her sin and desired it, she was destroyed. And then verse 27, it says, Abraham got up early that morning and hurried out to the place where he had stood in the Lord's presence. He looked out across the plain toward Sodom and Gomorrah and watched as columns of smoke rose from the cities like smoke from a furnace. But God had listened to Abraham's request and kept Lot safe, removing him from the disaster that engulfed the cities on the plain. So Abraham prayed for Lot's protection. Abraham was a man of God. God respected Abraham and listened to his prayer. And so Lot is saved. Now I want you to see what Lot does with his life in being saved. Verse 30. Afterward, Lot left Zoar because he was afraid of the people there. And he went to live in a cave in the mountains with his 2 daughters. One day the older daughter said to her sister, There are no men left anywhere in this entire area, so we can't get married like everyone else. And our father will soon be too old to have children. Come, let's get him drunk with wine, and then we will have sex with him. That way we will preserve our family line through our father. So that night they got him drunk with wine, and the older daughter went in and had intercourse with her father. He was unaware of her lying down or getting up again. The next morning the older daughter had said to her younger sister, I had sex with our father last night. Let's get him drunk with wine again tonight, and you go in and have sex with him. That way we will preserve our family line through our father. So that night they got him drunk with wine again, and the younger daughter went in and had intercourse with him. As before, he was unaware of her lying down or getting up. As a result, both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their own father. When the older daughter gave birth to a son, she named him Moab. He became the ancestor of the nation now known as Moabites. When the younger daughter gave birth to a son, she named him Ben-Ami. He became the ancestor of the nation now known as the Ammonites. Now, I read this last section for a couple different reasons. One, again, it's just really sad. It's sad what happened to Lot and just his legacy that he left. to think of your legacy being that you got drunk and had intercourse with your own daughters, and that's how your family lineage went on, is just really sad. And that's the state he'd gotten to because he just made wrong choices in his life, and he continued to make wrong choices. But what I find fascinating is the fact that these children that are born of this terrible deed are children that become nations that constantly give Israel trouble. They are constantly a thorn in their side and bring a lot of death and destruction and pain and heartache to the Israelites. And so this is the last point I want to share with you. Our prayers have power, and we should be careful what we ask for. Our prayers have power, and we should be careful what we ask for. I really hope Lot is in heaven, and I take hope in that he was called a righteous man in the New Testament, and I think he did believe in the Lord. He certainly saw tangible evidence of the Lord, but his legacy is awful, and because Abraham prayed for his protection and was granted that prayer request, and Lot chose to do these horrible things with his life, lots of pain and sorrow comes as a result. And there are other examples. One of the clear examples I can think of in the Bible is Hezekiah, who prayed for extra life. God told him he was going to die, and he whined and begged for more years of his life. He was so depressed about dying, which is sad because he could have seen the Lord right then. But he asked for 15. He got 15 extra years, and he used those 15 years to basically destroy his legacy also and bring the Babylonians into to captivate the Israelites. And so I really, truly believe that we can pray prayers with power and with faith that God will answer that aren't necessarily best for us. Now, I also believe that God is a loving, gracious God that will at times say no to our prayer requests because he knows that's not what's best for us. But there are times where he will honor our prayer requests even though they're not healthy for us. And so we need to be very careful that we are praying for things that line up with God's plan for our life, that we are praying for things that will be healthy for our walk with God, not necessarily praying for things that we think are best because we don't know what's best. God has the big picture. He knows what's best. But because if we live a life of devotion and honor to God, and we are reckless with our prayer life, we can pray for things that are unhealthy for us and for other people. And so I just want to keep that in mind as we pray and make sure that we're lining up our prayers with whatever God would have for our life. That was a lot today. There's a lot of interesting stuff in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Come back next week. Read ahead if you can and read chapter 20 about the story of Abimelech, and we will study that next week. See you then.